Hi, welcome to the small shed. This week on the Cyclekart I'm making a start on getting some more assembly done. See you in a minute. Now this week I'm trying to get some of the bits and pieces fully finished so that they can be incorporated into the cart. Getting the floor sorted in the front, getting the spring tidied up and that sort of thing. So let's dive in and have a look and see what's happening. Okay, so after the euphoria of Gaydon last week and the inaugural Cyclekart meet, which was really useful, very positive and quite inspiring, having seen some of the other carts that were there. I've made one or two changes. I'm just messing around a bit in the garage to get a few things straight that needed to be sorted. Originally the front floor went up to the bulkhead position and I was going to put a cross member in at that point, same as that one. And having looked at it and got that front plate on there, I don't think it's necessary, so I've made a new floor panel which is slightly thicker, still rebated to fit in the grooves, but that now I think is okay, ready just to be overlaid with a bit of the dye bond which will give an aluminium floor finish in there. I've been messing around with the tie rod bits just to see how everything works. I think it's going to be okay. I've been a bit hesitant because there's a few issues there with steering rods and that are going to be close, but I think we've got to the point where it'll work. I think I've just put some temporary rodding in just to get me sort of geometry right, and even just with these pair of tie rods rather than four, they're not tightened up or anything. They're held on with big clips, crop clips, but even now that whole front end is pretty solid. There's very little movement with the axle side to side on the chassis, which is what I was afraid of. So I don't think I'm going to need a panhard rod, but if I do, we can drop one in later. By the time we get another pair of those on the other side, I think that will work. Got to sort out the steering geometry, and again that's why it's useful to have the steering rod in there. That gives me a straight line from kingpin to, from track rod end to track rod end, and hopefully now that gives me a position for the steering column to go down for where that needs to land, and it'll also give me a chance to put a marker in the middle, move it from lock to lock and find how much movement I've got. It does feel quite heavy at the moment, so I'm slightly worried about that, but we'll see when we get a little bit closer on with it. What I think I mentioned before is that the steering column, thankfully, if I go above like that to operate it, means it's well clear of my feet in the footwell and getting in and out of the cart. So that's good. I was always assuming it would be something like that as an arrangement, but which is not only difficult to get your legs in and out of, it's in the way of the pedals as well. And it's only when you start to put the thing together and get the 3D relationships of everything that you can see that that will be a much better position to put it in, because it just clears my legs completely in the rest of the area. So I think that's probably the next thing I'm going to move on to, get this centre bulkhead finished, put in place. I've had a few ideas on that as to how it's skinned and worked up, and then I can hopefully put this whole front end together with the steering and everything. Once that's done, as I've said all along, put a seat in it and I can ascertain where the back is going to be. One of the other things that's come out of the chats at Gaydon and subsequent looking at on the internet is ground clearance as well. I was aiming all along for 100 mil, and at the moment I've got 100 at the well, I've got 95 at the front, probably 90 with the bolt heads on that current arrangement, and at the back I'm looking at about 85 at the moment, but that is not sorting this arrangement out properly yet. It's just propped up on loose bits, so I can lift and lower at the front easily enough by just altering either the spring perch, packing, the length of the drop links, whatever. There are ways to tweak that, but I am going towards dropping it down slightly. I think I can probably get down to 75 to 85 as being a loaded ground clearance, because people are running them at lower than that even. So given that the UK stuff is generally on kart tracks and things, it's fairly smooth and flat. We don't do a lot off-road. I think I'll probably go for a slightly lower ground clearance. I've also got to establish where the brake disc and the chainwheel will fit, but we'll move on to that once we've got all of this seating position sorted. Now it's time to tidy up the front spring on the cart. I've got one of the spare pieces that I don't think I'll need, one of the leaves that came off it, to experiment with. Got a variety of things to try. I want to get it back to steel. I don't want it shiny perfect, but I want it to look like well used but looked after. So the first thing I want to do is get it back to essentially a silver metal. I've got a variety of things to try out. I've got some flat discs from 40 down to 120 grit. I've got like a spongy sort of wheel to go in a grinder that's abrasive, and I've got some wire wheels to go in a drill, none of which may work, but we will see. The only thing that's overwhelmingly important with anything like this is eye protection. I'm not a huge user of PPE like I should do, but the one thing I will always have is something on my eyes for these things in particular, because the little spines come off these and fly out, and I've had them in my hands and they hurt. Get one of those in an eyeball and you would know about it, and they are not very secure anyway, and I'm not sure about this thing, but we will try it. But we'll start off with the drill with the wire wheel in and see what we get with that. That's okay, it's tending to get there after a little bit of work. We'll try the wheel for next and see what that does. I may well take this stuff off because it's liable to catch and get dragged in, I think. It's on a bit of plywood, I think. Whatever I succeed in or not in doing, I will be doing it outside, because you can see already there's an amount of dust and stuff that makes a mess. And certainly getting metal around anything in the woodwork shop is not ideal. So let's just try this wheel. Definitely the best tool for the job. What I want to do now is just get a very light sand on it. I can find my sanding block. Just go reasonably coarse with an 80 grit, I think. Yeah, that's what I want. I don't mind abrasions and knocks in it that have got mess in them. The problem will be now to try and keep that anything like, and I really don't know. So I'm going to do a quick experiment with this. I'm going to put some teak oil on it, which is effectively an oil that hardens and dries off over time, and we'll give it a couple of coats of that and then chuck it outside for a week or two and see what happens. So what I'm hoping is that will resist. I mean, the thing isn't going to be left without any sort of protection because it'll be under cover or dry, but atmospheric rust or atmospheric damp will rust it anyway. So we'll put the oil on and give it a couple of coats of that, chuck it outside, and we'll come back to it in a couple of weeks' time and see what it's doing. So that's the springs looking now as if they're cared for, at least. I'm just putting a bit of Danish or teak oil on them to try and keep the rust at bay. I'll put a couple of coats of this on, and then before they're finally assembled we will grease the whole thing up because it wants grease between the leaves, but I just don't want any flash rust to come in the next weeks while it's sitting around waiting for things to happen. So a couple of coats of oil, it leaves a film on it which dries off, and I'm hoping will give it some protection. Now I've put a new floor in the Cyclekart at the front. The original one only used to go up to about there. I was originally going to put a front cross member in further forward, but with all of this support on the front end here I really don't need it. So I decided to omit that cross piece and just go for a full floor all the way through. That's fine, it's slightly thicker than the original stuff, but I just rebaited it out the same as I did on the original. And it will get some finish on underneath it, and probably something like an underseal probably to keep it protected. On the inside though, I know from even the brief time that this has been in use, it gets quite messy. Footprints all over it, and it will not be particularly serviceable. So I'm going to put a piece of dye bond into this area. Certainly I may do the rest of it, I'm not sure yet, because you can get a nice aluminium finish on it by just rubbing off the original paint finish, and it will then look like an aluminium floor even though the aluminium is only toothpaste thickness, toothpaste tube thickness I should say. So we're just going to measure that up first, and then I'll cut a piece out, and again not sure how I'll fix it, probably just glue it down with the contact adhesive, but we'll see. Just marking out the dye bond for the floor panel to go on top of the floor timber panel so that we get an aluminium look to things. I've used the old floor that I took out and replaced with the longer one just to get the reference. I've put it into the chassis rails, and in fact I've got a little bit of slop in it because this goes into a channel. But I've just measured up and it's about 2 millimeters wider at the back if I push this into the existing chassis. So I've just corrected for that, marked the lines on, and I'm just going to cut it one side with a sharp knife. And if I get a couple of cuts in on that to get through the aluminium, it should then bend and crack along that line, and then we just have to cut the other aluminium on the other side. It. Just clean it up there with a file in a couple of places where it didn't quite cut properly. Do the other side and then we can go and try and fit it. Now I'm happy with that. The only problem is that I've dropped it in and it's a tight fit, and unfortunately I can't get it back out again because there's nothing to lift it by. Very little room. There we go, we can get it. Thankfully that centre rail's a bit loose still at the moment. So, there we go. So having got the panel cut to the right size, just going to get it back to aluminium now on the finish for the floor. Will get scratched and damaged, but that's again all part of being race worn. I don't really want it white. Just get the protective film off first, and then we'll attack it with a random orbital sander. I think it's 120 grit on that. Just got a last rub over of 600 grit and we're about there. Ready to clean that up now, get the dust off it, and I might do the same as I'm doing on the front suspension, get some oil or something on that just to keep the finish, stop it going oxidising too much. But that looks like a sheet of aluminium. I don't know how it works out weight wise to aluminium, but certainly this is probably, in terms of cost, I think I paid about £10 an 8x4 sheet, something like that, probably less than that. So it's very cheap from that point of view. With regards to weight, I must start weighing everything that goes into this cart to get an idea. That is about 480 grams. So it's not light, but it's 2mm thick, giving me a decent floor finish in the cockpit. As I say, I think I'll just rub a spot of oil on it. Just to stop it getting marked with fingerprints and things like that. Now, I've done a lot of messing around with the front end, taking stuff on and off, getting things to where I want them, and I've got a rough idea of where I want to go with the radius rods and arms. But before I can actually finally put it all together, what I really need to do now is think long and hard about what bolts I'm using where. The front end of the chassis is all sorted, and I'm quite happy with that. But as far as this goes, I'm just using any old bolts I've got lying around on all of these bits, and some are suitable, some are not suitable. So I need to just stand for 10 or 15 minutes on the front end and go through every junction, every bolt, and see what I need, how long I need it, what sort of shape I want, because some of the things like these aren't really prototypical in terms of age and 1930s look. So I'll be putting a normal bolt on, but then I've got options like that where I've got a bolt that looks as if it's got a washer already on it that spreads the load, or a straightforward bolt like that. So I need to just have a quiet think about all of that, what I need to do, whether I need lock washers, where I need lock washers, again, nylock nuts or anti-lock washers, I don't quite know yet. I need to just sit and think about all of that and get it all to a position where it's ready to bolt the whole thing up. And the other thing I need to do now, I've got some more metal, is to get these spring hangers sorted, get the right length resolved for ground clearance, and get those cut nicely rounded off. And again, whether I need washers between that and the tube, all sorts of things like that that need just to sit and look, think about. I want to get the whole of the tube rubbed down like that to get rid of the bluing and all the marks on it there. And again, I'll do the same as I've done with the front spring, just do the whole thing with an oil so that it will hopefully stop it getting rusty, but give it that fresh out of factory but used working look. And again on the arms here at the end, the aluminium, that all needs sanding back now properly. Now we're getting somewhere closer. Get all the welds tidied up, smoothed up, get all the tooling marks out of it and scratches out of it, and get it again probably polished up. Okay, so things are starting to take shape, and we're starting to get a few things being bolted together a little bit more permanently. Hope the video was of interest. Look forward to seeing you next week. We'll be doing something different on the Cyclekart. Hope to see you then. Bye.